Hello everybody, welcome. So thank you all for coming. You know the drill, we will talk for about 40 minutes presenting Nia's work, and then our keynote speaker for tonight will continue with the lecture. Dear Madam General Director of Antiquities and Cultural Heritage, dear administrative leaders of the Norwegian Institute, colleagues at the University of Bergen and elsewhere in Norway, colleagues from the Nordic Institutes and all foreign schools in Greece, the Embassy of Norway, all dear friends, welcome to our 33rd annual meeting of the Norwegian Institute at Athens. This time we are happy to see some of you in person after 2 years of online experience. We would also like to wish well to our guests that could not attend because of illness. I'm also very pleased to welcome first our esteemed guest for this evening's lecture, Dr. Halvor Fosheim, Professor of Ancient Philosophy at the University of Bergen and member of the recently appointed Advisory Committee for the Institute in Norway. Thank you, Professor Halvor, for being here with us, for being part of the day. And my new colleague at NIA, Dr. Paschalis Zafiriadis, who came on board in September 2021. Just a few introductory words for Paschalis. Paschalis Zafiriadis is an archaeologist with an MA and a doctoral degree in Aegean Bronze Age archaeology from the Department of Classics, University of Cincinnati. He also holds an MA in prehistoric archaeology from the Aristotle University in Thessaloniki and a BA in archaeology and art history from the same university. At NIA, he was chosen among 16 highly qualified candidates, both Norwegians and Greeks, to take the permanent position of advisor at the Institute, after our dear colleague Dr. Zarko Tankosic, quite familiar to most of you, has opted for a more international career in Norway at the Sapiens Center of Excellence, University of Bergen. This also gives me the chance to thank Zarko publicly for all the years of excellent collaborative work and definitely great friendship. Dr. Zafiriadis has been with the Institute in many occasions during the past 10 years, was also a research fellow in the years 2019-2020, and has been co-directing NIA's excavation at Gourimadi Karistos, we will talk later about that excavation, effort of antiquities of Evia since 2018, under the direction of Zarko Tankosic. Paschalis is a very experienced field researcher and member of international programs in Neolithic archaeology, has extensive teaching experience and relevant publications. A warm welcome to you, Paschalis. 2021 did not bring the long-awaited relief from the pandemic, and much of the traveling between Norway and Greece was again cancelled or postponed. Still, even though activities normally signal the thriving of an institution, it is sometimes a luxury to take a step back. This time we have to do it by force, to reconsider existing possibilities plus draft new strategic plans. In the light of the recent institute restructuring, with the University of Bergen being our sole owner since 2020, and the University of Oslo an administrative and scientific supporter, the Norwegian university sector was repositioned as the main pillar of the Institute's archaeological and educational activities. To this end, we had a chance to use some of 2021 to rethink our strategies in order to foster new networks between the two countries. Those plans will unfold in the coming years. Just a glimpse of the future, I would like to present you an idea that emerged already back in 2020 and was endorsed by the former director of the Norwegian Institute, Professor Untitled, who I personally thank. It is the launching of a series of dialogues. We have termed that dialogues, preferably in person, between a Norwegian and a Greek scholar about a common topic of interest. Dialogues will present a variety of trendy research themes cutting across the spectrum of humanities and social sciences, from digital archaeology to new methods in historiography, sustainable policies in heritage and the environment, curation studies, and others, and will happen in a relaxed dialogical mood without external moderation. We look forward to our first academic copy of the series in May 2022, so stay tuned to our social media for an announcement. Now, the events that did happen in 2021 carried a longer-lasting significance for the Institute, as they have given evidence for an increased interest, collaboration, and scientific exchange. At the online annual meeting of 2021 on March 23rd, we had the pleasure to host Dr. Katerina Harvadi, Professor in Paleoanthropology and Director of the Institute of Archaeological Sciences at the Senckenberg Center for Human Evolution and Paleoenvironment, University of Tübingen in Germany. She is also a faculty member at the Department of Archaeology, History, Cultural Studies and Religion at our art institution at the University of Berlin. Dr. Harvadi's talk, still uploaded on our YouTube channel for anyone interested, was titled Apidima, the earliest Homo sapiens in Eurasia, past and plant research, and revolved around her work at the cave Apidima in Mani. We are happy to announce that Dr. Harvadi has recently got a permit from the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports to start an excavation project in Apidima in late summer 2022, which will definitely be discussed in detail at next year's annual meeting. Moreover, in April 2021, the Association of NIA's Friends in Norway, which was established in 2019 due to the efforts of a group of dedicated friends, such as the professors Anastasia Maravella and Christina Madu from the University of Oslo, among others, announced a brand new Atheneum travel grant of 15,000 Norwegian krona for young Norwegian scholars who wish to spend research time in Greece and become affiliated with the Norwegian Institute at Athens. The first recipient of the grant for the years 2021-2022 was an MA student in archaeology at the University of Bergen by the name of Axel Teigen Breistrand, who happens to be here with us tonight. Congratulations, Axel. More about your work and your Athenian/Roman experience next year. Another important decision in 2021 regarding the Institute's scientific support and networking was the launching of a joint advisory committee, which I mentioned before, between the Universities of Berlin and Oslo, under the leadership of Professor Ole Jortland, Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Berlin. Proposed members of the committee are Professor Halvor Fosheim from the Department of Philosophy, Faculty of Humanities, University of Berlin. He is our keynote speaker for tonight. Professor Eivind Helders Selland, Department of Archaeology, History, Cultural Studies and Religion, Faculty of Humanities, University of Berlin. Matilde Skoye, Vice Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, University of Oslo, plus a student representative whose name is not yet disclosed. We are truly happy to be more connected with the academic world in Norway and foster new synergies between the two countries for research and education. Speaking of synergies, we should not forget to mention the launching of the traveling exhibition Travelers from the North, whose first version was presented at the Nordic Library in 2018 and was curated by Maria Marzuku from the Finnish Institute, Evi Haritudi, the then librarian at the Nordic Library, and myself. As a result of our long-lasting bonds with the other Nordic institutes at Athens, the Danish, the Swedish, and the Finnish, as well as the Nordic embassies in Greece, the initial exhibition did receive funds by the Nordic Council. Its 2021 version, in traveling package, was first presented in Amphissa in December 2021 within the framework of the bicentenary of the Greek independence and was very well attended. The catalogue has been beautifully revised by Maria Marzoku from the Finnish Institute to include all exhibition texts and supplementary information. This is the revised catalogue, and I just have a copy if anybody wants to have a look. The plan is to take the exhibition to a few more cities in Greece this year. Details will all feature in our 2023 meeting. In 2021, a Facebook series titled Norwegian Perspectives on Greece's Past was launched on March 24 and ran throughout the year. It presents all publications of the Norwegian Institute, and it was an initiative by the Norwegian Embassy in Greece. This series celebrates in its own way the bicentennial from the Greek Revolution 1821 and presents an anthology of our books from scholars in Norway who have contributed to Hellenic studies through their work on different aspects of history and cultural heritage, from antiquity to the present day. We do thank the Embassy, Utter again, for being an active near supporter. Close is our collaboration with the Nordic Library, as the Norwegian Institute, along with the other Nordic foreign schools in Greece, is responsible for its administrative running. In 2021, 2 official meetings of the Institute heads took place at Cavalotti number 7 to discuss budget and other operational and promotional issues. Apart from being one of the best scientific libraries in Greece, the Nordic Library seems like the ideal hub to house some common action, not least during this time of war and destruction. The idea of the Finnish director, Dr. Petra Pakanen, to organize an activity on Ukrainian archaeology, literature and heritage, with emphasis on the city of Odessa, a center of diaspora for many nations, including a vivid historic Greek community, is as appropriate as ever. Thank you, Petra, and all directors for the initiative. Because of the distinct celebratory nature of 2021, another collaborative event was nurtured last year. It was prepared last year and is now ripe, namely a conference titled Greece and Norway, European Center, Periphery, or It's Complicated, bringing together scholars and researchers from Norway and Greece. The initial idea drew upon the constitution of 2 young nations, Greece and Norway, approximately becoming nations at the same historic time, the beginning of the 19th century. This is why the coming event on April 11, in a couple of weeks, and less, relates more to the year that is already behind us, and at the same time does not really suffer the restrictions of time. Rounding up this first part of 2021 activities, I should also mention an event that took place in December 12, 2021. Women on Top was a significant addition to our list because of its contemporary topic and focus on civil society. The organization, Women on Top, aims to implement, with the support of the Innovation Norway grant, a program called Gender Equality in the Corporate World. What can we learn from Norway and Iceland about empowering women in business? The program identifies, localizes and spreads good practices and insights that have positioned Norway and Iceland at the center of the discussion about gender equality in the global corporate sphere, and support Greek businesses, organizations and government bodies in using this knowledge to produce their own set of policies and strategies for gender diversity in the Balkan, religion and beyond. Before I give the floor to Dr. Zafiliadis, who will present you the archaeological work of the Institute and our new publications in the series of papers and monographs from the Norwegian Institute at Athens, I would like to extend my thanks to NIA's administrative leaders in Norway, especially Per Arne Foshog and our senior advisor Ragnar Valeni Bergen, unfortunately we had an issue with Zoom and they are not able to see us at this moment. His Excellency the Ambassador and our colleagues at the Norwegian Embassy in Greece, particularly Christina Soldina and Nikos Agouros, and all colleagues at the foreign schools in Athens. On the Greek front, we are grateful as always to the leadership of the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports, the Minister Dr. Lina Menthoni, the Secretary General of Culture Mr. Georgios Didaskalu, the General Director of Antiquities and Cultural Heritage, who is honoring our event with her presence, Dr. Politseka Namveleni, the Director of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities, Dr. Elena Koundouri, the Director of Byzantine and Post-Byzantine Antiquities, Dr. Iulia Papageorgiou, and all the other directors, efforts, and colleagues who have been collaborating with the Institute throughout the years. Thank you all for coming tonight. Enjoy the rest of the evening, and do check our webpage, uib.no/MIA. Also Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube for additional information and regular updates on our activities. Thank you very, very much. Paschalis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Delia. Nice words. I'm glad to. All right. I would also like to welcome you to MIA's 33rd annual meeting. I would also like to cherish this opportunity to express my appreciation to the University of Berlin for giving me the opportunity to work and engage with the vibrant community of foreign schools in Athens. Unfortunately, the COVID-related restrictions and the justified reluctance for international travels has greatly affected our activities during the previous year. To put it bluntly, almost all of our scheduled activities for 2021 that involve the physical presence of people at MIA have been cancelled or scheduled for a later date. Despite the difficulties, we were still able to conduct some of our activities either by sitting them online or in person during the time where the restrictions were eased. The latter most concerns our archaeological fieldwork in Luboy and Cycladic. We organized one online lecture by Professor Jan Bill from the University of Oslo at the Museum of Cultural History. The lecture presented for the first time the excavation of the monumental Viking seat burial discovered in 2019 in Gjerstad, which is quite an honor for me. This lecture was part of the Vikings lecture series organized by the Norwegian Swedish Institute at Athens. We really hope that this Viking series is here to stay. 2021 was successful concerning our publications. Under the coordination of my predecessor, Zarko Tankovic, to manage the original publication series with 3 new titles. Taking them chronologically, our first publication titled Constituting Artemis came by Line Osip Hansen. The book approaches the goddess Artemis in her many and complex manifestations as a social and cultural phenomenon. A link to the digital open access version of this book is already available on the publication section of our website. Next came the volume titled The Portrait Face, Understanding Realism and Verism in Greek and Roman Portraiture, edited by Celia Dillon, Marina Prusats, Lilhagen, and Astrid Karin. It publishes the proceedings of an international workshop held at the Norwegian Institute on May 2018. The contributors of this volume attempted to define and describe the terms realism and verism as applied to this archaeological category. Finally, our latest volume, Curses in Context 3, edited by Christopher Faraone and Irene Polinskaya, publishes the proceedings of the third meeting of the ongoing project Curses in Context. The volume provides an invaluable insight and resource to curse tablets from classical and Hellenistic period and adds up to our understanding of this material category. Before moving on to our archaeological activities, the main course of this report, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to all participants in our archaeological projects during the last 2 pandemic field seasons. Their commitment, professionalism, and sense of responsibility concerning the rigid observation of COVID measures made it possible for us to keep our archaeological projects going without any unfortunate events. For the same reason, we also owe a fair share of gratitude to the supervising efforts of Boya and Cycladic. And I will start with GAP for my obvious sentimental reasons. Gurimani Archaeological Project is an independent 5-year project of archaeological excavations at the prehistoric site in the vicinity of Karistos in southern Greece. The project is directed by Cycladic, with Fanes Mavridis and myself serving as co-directors. Gourimati is located in an area called the Katsarondo Plain, or Campus, approximately 6 kilometers from the town of Karistos. The site was discovered during an earlier survey by the Norwegian Institute in the same area and immediately recognized as important based on the composition of artifacts collected from its surface. The location of the site is also indicative of its importance, as it forms a natural hillfort that dominates its immediate surroundings and provides excellent vistas of East Attica and the northern Cycladic islands. We started this project with several research questions or goals to bear in mind. First, we wanted for the first time to systematically excavate the final Neolithic settlement in southern area. Second, this is one of the few prehistoric multi-period sites in the region with the potential for providing information about the transition between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age. Third, the many obsidian arrowheads suggested either a specialized use of the site or evidence for conflict, and we wanted to determine which one of these is cited. Finally, a unique surface find of a completely preserved copper implement pointed to the possible existence of previously unknown early metallurgical activities in this area that we wanted to examine further. According to the size of the archaeological materials surface covered, the maximum extent of the site is about 4 to 5 hectares, although it likely covered somewhat smaller area. The site extends from the summit and northwest and south slopes of the hill, formed around a natural schist outcrop. In 2021, as in the previous years, we followed a standard excavation methodology used at prehistoric sites in Aegean and elsewhere, relying heavily on digital recording techniques and protocols developed specifically for the site, for the project, and later on adjusted by Dr. Tyrant and Fieldwork in 2021 involved the excavation of 2 trenches, none of which reached the bedrock. We continued the excavation of Trench 1 on the top flat part of the summit of the hill and opened a new one, Trench 5, immediately to its west to study the spatial distribution of features uncovered in the southwest corner of Trench 1 in previous year. Our main aim was, and still is, to open a larger surface to try to understand the increasingly complex architectural situation at the site. As expected, the architectural remains extend in multiple directions in relation to what we've originally seen in Trench 1. With the ongoing excavation in Trench 5, it now appears that most of the top of the Gourimati hill was originally covered with structures belonging to multiple prehistoric occupation phases. Moreover, most of the walls we could identify thus far, as you can see, are not rectilinear. The new architectural findings from these 2 trenches exposed further the horizontal and vertical distribution of the building activity at the site and yielded information about the earliest, so far, occupation episodes at Gourimati. The partial excavation of what preliminary appears to have been an adobe-made structure flanked by 3 shallow portholes in the deeper layers of Trench 5, which is about 2 meters from the modern surface, has been an astonishing and, to our current knowledge, unique for the prehistoric archaeology of southern area discovery. What is evident, though, is that this feature indicates the presence of building techniques that are different from the usual till now in Gourimati stone-built masonry. Almost all the excavated walls consist of multiple courses of carefully laid out rocks connected by mud mortar, which contains fragments of pottery and sometimes small pieces of burnt oak. In addition to walls, we have found so far other architectural elements such as pits, a roughly circular shaped hearth, and a dome oven. Pottery and chip stone represent the most numerous categories of finds in Gourimati in 2021. No striking changes to these 2 major artifactual categories were noted, aside the preliminary observation that obsidian findings, although still abundant, seem to slightly decrease in numbers as excavation proceeds to lower levels. On macroscopic inspection, most of the ceramics still most of the ceramic material still looks local. Among the pottery shapes, open-mouthed, and closed shapes are present. Middle monochrome ware is the most dominant, coarse follows, while medium to fine usually dark-faced vernisseurs are unlimited in number. Notable also is the presence of various kinds of coral handles in different types of wares. There is also much variation in decoration of pottery, with incised plastic and crafted decoration dominating the assemblies. The pottery is generally datable to the late 5th and 4th millennia BC, with parallels in sites such as Τελειάων Mykonos and Kefala on Kea. A single matte painted shirt, right, from the lower levels of Trans 5 constitutes perhaps the earliest indeed movable find excavated in Bulimadi and possibly in Holcaristia. Cheap stone tools, overwhelmingly made of Melian obsidian, still constitute a large part of the Bulimadi archaeological assemblage, with thousands of pieces collected thus far. Noteworthy is the large number of arrowheads, currently standing at more than 200 total, including those recovered from the surface of the site. Most arrowheads are tanned and barbed, and some by Hesper retards, bearing typological features encountered in other late Neolithic and final Neolithic sites in Greece. The assemblage also contains a considerable amount of heavy dust that demonstrates on-site reduction. All phases of reduction sequence were identified, and the site appears to have played a central role, at least locally or regionally, in obsidian artifact production. In addition to pottery and lithics, the 2021 excavation produced other types of material, but not in much smaller quantities. Next to the increasing number of animal bones, chiefly from domesticated animals, we have found ground tools and parts of a possible large figurine. The recovery of a well-preserved bronze bowl out from Trans 5 is a unique find of this type and the only metal object from the safe context of Bulimadi. To summarize, the 2021 excavations added new data towards understanding this complicated site. We have certainly expanded our knowledge about the architectural remains of the site, and although our understanding of them is still imperfect, what we likely have here is a case of a well-preserved, overlapping construction phases dated to the 5th and 4th millennia BCE. The accumulated quantities of pottery and lithics will also help us in characterizing the chronology and the function of the site. With solid indicators of mid and perhaps early 5th millennium occupation, Bulimadi is at the moment the oldest open-air site along the southern area and is crucial for understanding prehistoric chronology in the Aegean as a whole. We must also mention that GAP is organized as a free of charge school where Norwegian, Greek, and international students can obtain transferable archaeological and technical skills applicable in more geographical and chronological context. So far, many students from the universities of Bergen, Oslo, Trondheim, and Athens have participated with the interest growing every year. Finally, the project directors and the Norwegian Institute thank all the individuals and institutions that have assisted us in the successful conduct of this project, with apologies if we have left anyone out. Special thanks go to our team of specialists and volunteers primarily from Norway, Greece, but also from the US, Bulgaria, Turkey, Albania, Italy, and the Netherlands. Finally, we would like to take this opportunity and send our warmest gratitude to the effort of area, and specifically to the director, Dr. Aristotle for all their support, and to the staff of Caristos Museum for their unreserved help all these years. Let's now turn to our second active archaeological field project, the small Cycladic island project, also known as SKIP. The project is directed by Dimitrios Antanasoulis, Zacho Tankosis, and Alex Model. SKIP is an archaeological survey focused on the several very small, currently uninhabited islands across the Cyclades. These islands, many of which have played outsized roles in the history of the Mediterranean, such as in exchange networks and the dissemination of agricultural and metallurgical practices, while others have served as sanctuaries used for resource extraction or even as pirate highways, are the target of SKIP. SKIP began in 2019 as a Greek-Norwegian-American collaboration between the effort of antiquities of the Cyclades, the Norwegian Institute at Athens, and Carleton College from the US. 2021 signaled the end of the first stage of SKIP's research. In 2019 and 2020, SKIP carried out comprehensive surveys of 21 islands in the vicinity of Paros. In 2021, we turned to the Western Cyclades and Skyros, where we surveyed 18 further islands, some offshore and some more remote. Each island was surveyed using a combination of systematic unit-based fieldworking, environmental study, and architectural documentation through mapping, drawing, and photography. Each island was documented and mapped by aerial photography and photographic means next to more conventional methods of documentation. Systematic and intensive fieldworking allowed for the quantification of artifacts and densities across relatively uniform survey units on different islands. For all three field seasons, preliminary analysis is being carried out for all pottery collected on this island, providing a diachronic and functional picture of activity on the survey islands. A short study season this past December, led by John Cherry, focused on the cheap stone assemblage, mostly obsidian. In 2021, Skip surveyed nearly all of the small islands surrounding Kythnos, Serifos, Cyclos, and Syros. The preliminary analysis of the collected data already allows identification of some patterns. Specifically, 2021 offered the opportunity to expand the scope of the project by surveying places that were even more physically remote, namely Piperi, Serifopula, Vous, and Kypriani. The findings from these islets contrast sharply with data collected from the so-called offshore islets, located very close to larger islands, in this case Kythnos and Syros, but also to other similar cases from the previous seasons. Serifopula, one of these remote islands, proved difficult to survey because of its terrain, especially in its north and south parts, as you can see in this density plot. Notable sites and features there include the church of Panagias PE, at least 4 prehistoric sites with substantial obsidian scatters, shown here in green, a classical Hellenistic tower with an archaic classical site, and an early modern settlement called Mitana. Metallurgical remains were found in certain parts of the island, including slag and possible kiln. The panoramic views from various corners of the island are striking, particularly from the tower. Another Hellenistic tower was found on Piperi, which was certainly one of the more challenging islands to survey. Piperi stands out as tall and steep as it rises from the sea at an almost 45-degree angle before dropping off in a cliff. The round shape of the tower and associated pottery suggested it dated from the Hellenistic period. While it is tempting to see this as a part of a system, also including Serifopula and Strogilo, where another tower with vistas was found in the previous year, the topography and masonry seem to tell another story. While locations of the Serifopula and Strogilo towers indicate a surveillance purpose, Piperi is not in such a location and is probably rather built to protect agricultural resources harvested on the island, or oriented specifically toward the busy Kythnos-Serifos trade. Either way, its strategic location seems to have been the key factor for its occupation. The island of Vous tells a comparable story. Although endowed with a natural strategic location, it only returned a late Roman building on the south side of the island facing Cyclos and Milos. Kypriani, the last of the remote islands surveyed, is located just off the south coast of Cyclos. The strait between Kypriani and Cyclos was apparently an important sea route, as noted in Byzantine texts. A 1st century BCE Scythian inscription mentions that this was an anchorage and refuge for pirate ships. Several periods are represented in this island in the form of pottery and architectural remains, along with evidence of metallurgical activities. Collected materials span from prehistoric to historical periods with abundant Byzantine material. So, what was the role of these remote in-between as the directors of the project called them islands? The collected lithic material highlights how the in-betweenness of these places was already, if not even more important, in the prehistoric periods, before the advent of sailing technology in the Middle Bronze Age. This is reflected in the obsidian assemblages, which tend to be far more voluminous than smaller offshore islets. This probably evinces the prehistoric importance of these places as strategic stopovers on the way to Milos and as basis for the exploitation of marine resources such as tuna, being both in the middle of known fishing routes and migratory routes documented in historical periods. Turning to the islets surrounding Kythnos and Syros, these largely fit patterns observed on offshore islands in 2020 and 2019 were exceptionally small islands, so little signs of occupation, while larger ones seem to operate in close dialogue with their larger neighbors. This is evident, for example, in the case of Arios of Kas, seen here from the Acropolis of ancient Kythnos. Here, by the church of Arios of Kas, a site developed in clear dialogue with ancient Kythnos from the archaic period onward. Along the east side of Kythnos, finds were mostly seen period, including the modern church at Arios Ioannis Eleimon and the substantial obsidian scattered at Zogari. The islands of Syros followed a similar pattern, where the largest offshore islet, Didimi, exhibited a rich history of occupation at 3 separate sites, while the activity on other islets was scattered and incidental. The area of the 1834 lighthouse of Tyrant is also the location of a substantial multi-period pottery scatter, though modern material by far dominates the center. A second substantial site is located on the hill to the west of the summit, represented by pottery and the remains of several structures. Archaic and classical pottery were present at the site, but the assemblage was dominated by late Hellenistic and heavy Roman material. We expect that this site largely operated in dialogue with ancient Syrians. From the ongoing skip research, a few preliminary conclusions can be drawn. First, on the smaller islands, patterns of occupation or use are typically limited to particular, non-consistent periods. Larger islands, however, present more robust activity across more time periods. Second, the pattern of use of small islands is inevitably linked to available resources. Access to water is important, as is viable agricultural land, pasturage, and minor mineral resources. Third, isolation and connectivity are both significantly different situations. Fourth, systematic methods of team-based intensive survey have much to offer in smaller islands, especially when applied in a comparative fashion. In conclusion, the small Cycladic island project is a rare opportunity to combine small-scale and large-scale archaeological fieldwork in comparative context. This project also provides an archaeology of more incidental use, distributed across minuscule but resonant places of human activity. Looking ahead to the 2022 field season, skip will zoom in on mirrors. In some ways, this is where the great obsidian thread has been leading this project the entire time. In closing, we'd like to thank SKIP sponsoring institutions and funders, especially the AIA and NEH and LEB grants that funded a good deal of this work. Warm thanks also to everyone who contributed to the study season, especially those who headed up various components of the project, namely Denis Anenova, Henry on the ceramics, and Evan Levine and Hussein who stood on features. We are most grateful to everyone who contributed to this project. Now we will proceed to our keynote lecture, but before passing the microphone for our keynote lecture, allow me to introduce you briefly to our speaker, Professor Halvar Fossheim. Halvar Fossheim is a professor of ancient philosophy at the Department of Philosophy at the University of Bergen in Norway. His research focuses on ancient philosophy and ethics. Besides teaching at the University of Bergen, he has also taught on different occasions in numerous international universities as a visiting scholar, and he has published extensively on the topics of ancient philosophy, especially on Plato and Aristotle. Professor Fossheim also served as the director of the National Committee for Research Ethics in Social Sciences and the National Committee for Research Ethics on Human Remains, which performs ethical evaluation of research of human remains. He has participated in several projects, including, for example, the History of Philosophy and History of Ideas, 600 BC, 1880 project, and another project titled From Racial Pathology to DNA Sequencing project. Let us all welcome Professor Fossheim for his lecture, and thank you for your attention.
Good evening, everyone. My talk is about, as you can see, friendship and the tyrant. But first, I just want to add to this very nice presentation of the Institute's activities, highlight my own field, ancient philosophy. Both for me and for very many colleagues that I've known up through the years, ancient philosophy and classics, particularly Latvian, the work and the existence of the Institute, the Norwegian Institute at Athens, has been really important. For my case, since I first availed myself of its services back in 1995, and pretty much more or less continuously since then, with a brief pause for the pandemic, of course. So it really is a very important resource also for this field of research. Now, turning to my title, if we use modern theories and modern conceptions, the very title seems sort of like a category mistake, because tyranny and forms of rule has to do with political theory, political philosophy, whereas the idea of friendship belongs in ethics. So, you know, with our contemporary way of thinking and dividing things up, these are really two different things. And today you can have a really nice career in political philosophy and never really do any work in ethics. And similarly, you can be a success in ethical theory and never really look into political philosophy. To Plato and Aristotle, this would be absolutely baffling. Absolutely, almost crazy, the very idea of thinking that you could do one without the other. So I think from a more ancient perspective, the idea of asking about the relationship between the idea of the tyrant and the idea of friendship is very, very much to the point. Now, of course, when we just talk about political philosophy in relation to these two thinkers, we all know what text we go to straight away, and the ones that I'll be looking at tonight will be particularly the Republic by Plato and Politics by Aristotle. But of course, to both of them, these things are so interlaced that in Plato it's basically always about how to live. I mean, how should I live? How should I lead my life? And that certainly comes across politics and ethics. And with Aristotle, although we don't have that kind of nice drama left from him, but only something that looks like students' lecture notes, it's clear that the course in ethics and the course in politics is really one big course. So you haven't really taken the course unless you've taken both parts of it. Just to keep that in mind as a note. So where to start when looking into Plato and the tyrant? Let's start then from Plato's werewolf, because in Book 8 of the Republic, when Plato has Socrates look into how the tyrant comes about, he has Socrates start telling or reminding his interlocutor, Demantus at this point, I think it is, about a myth, about the Arcadian sort of wolf seals. And this is at a point in the dialogue where we are just getting told how democracy, according to Plato then, shifts into tyranny. And it does this by some person sort of getting ahead and starting the dialectic that ends up in tyranny. And this could seem like a rather sort of individually based kind of thing, so that most of the important stuff happens because there is a certain unique kind of individual there. But I think that the evocation of this ritual and the myth gives us a different perspective on the proceedings. So this myth is about a kind of ritual where the people sit down. This is somewhere up in Arcadia, and they're having a shared sort of sacrificial meal, and then it's stated that the person who ends up eating the bit of human entrails that's in this kind of potpourri meal will turn into a wolf. Again, it's possible to think of this as in a kind of individual sense, so that the main thing, the main exciting question then is, will this sort of werewolf, proto-werewolf, be able to not eat human flesh and thus return to humanity or not? And there is something to it. That this is about a ritual and it's about sort of progressing rather than regressing into the sort of animal state. But it's also the setting. This is not something that's just grounded in some individual's unique qualities. It's basically, and first and foremost, it's a ritual. This has to happen. Given the framework, someone has to turn into a werewolf in this story. There's just no choice about it. There is that almond in the porridge. There is that piece of human entrails in the meal. So it's not a question of whether this is going to happen, but who's it going to happen to, given that this is the ritual. So if we return then to the political degradation that is sketched in books 8 and 9 of the Republic, again, the suggestion is that it's not simply the individual that's important here. It's the setup, it's the framework. You have these kind of conditions, you're kind of asking for it. You're begging for tyranny to sooner or later to get started. Also, the analogies here are very strong. It's always this talk of tongue and mouth and taste getting. The idea of actually, in the case of the wolf, the werewolf, in this sort of Mycenaean myth, it's about getting a taste for human blood. And similarly, in the contemporary to Plato setting, you are getting a taste for human blood because the person who ends up as the tyrant is the one who's willing to abuse not the ecclesia, but the court system to get an innocent person executed because it served your interests. So there's this link between tasting blood and doing the wrong thing, and also, of course, using the mouth to lie and to deceive in the to Plato contemporary setting. So that's the whole setup, and I think it's crucial to keep this in mind, that this is not just individual typologies. It really is about institutions and settings and things that are super individual, if you like. The whole explanation of the transition from one regime to another. That also means, of course, that the tyrant wants this, for starters, this sort of special individual, because it is a special individual. Not anyone will be able to become tyrant. It does require some kind of special ability and some kind of special setup. Once you get caught in the game, there's like a spiral, and from this point there is no turning back. The logic for the tyrant is such that there is no longer any choice, because you've started on a movement where the only alternative is death, destruction, that you lose. The only way to keep your power, and it's all about power, no matter what the tyrant thinks it's power, the way to keep your power is to keep using all the tricks that are in the book for the tyrant's playbook, if you will. So that means that, for instance, war is a natural kind of trick to use. It's useful if people get busy about a war and they think they need a strong leader, and so it's useful. But you will also find that it's useful to just keep it going, because you need the people to keep on thinking that they need a strong leader, and you also need to keep them fairly poor so that they don't have much freedom to sit back and think and talk about stuff. They need to worry about the little things and those things, so that they don't look up and notice that the sadness of their existences. And all of this sort of, it works like that, a kind of spiral. One thing that's a little bit disconcerting for philosophers, perhaps, is that, you know, of course, that Plato is famous as a sort of erotic philosopher. He, through two dialogues in particular, the Phaedrus and the Symposium, he explains how philosophy and all great and beautiful stuff comes about through eros, which is a particular kind of intense passion for a certain thing that makes you grow and makes you change. But in the Republic, it's just baffling that there is very little eros. There's lots of philia, lots of friendship, but eros is more problematic. There's a darker side to eros in the Republic, Plato's Republic. So what we find then is that eros, it is mentioned in nicer settings as well, but eros here is tied to the tyrant and the tyrant's sort of economy of desire. The idea of getting all passionate and sort of almost crazy about one thing, so that all the other desires just hook onto this. That is something that characterizes the tyrant. And that one thing, ultimately, is just power. The disconcerting thing for philosophers is that that's structurally pretty close to how the philosopher, too, is characterized as someone who's sort of something out of the ordinary and has a tendency to sort of rush into something and just get really into that one thing. What this leads to, the logic of the thing, which is not just about, this is not just about the individuality of the tyrant, it's about the logic of the game, is that there is a sort of generation of a topsy-turvy world, an upside-down world, that is the consequence of the tyrant's rule. So where you started with what to the ancient Greeks was a sound and reasonable setup, where you had masters and slaves, now all of a sudden the masters, that is the private citizens, they become the slaves. And the slaves become closer to the tyrant, and they become freer. So there's this like an upside down turning of what to the Greeks would be a very, most Greeks anyway, would be a very basic kind of safe and identity creating hierarchy. Same thing with fathers and sons. The metaphors that are played out are such that now you have a perverse situation of the son first being fed by the father, which is the opposite of the right setting once the son is an adult, and the son then being the tyrant and the tyrant's entourage, and finally it's the son just beating on the father and punishing the father. It's deeply unsettling images to the ancient Greeks. So you have, all in all here, you have a sort of inverted catharsis. A good catharsis that a doctor can give you is the sort of thing that cleanses you out and you get rid of all the filth and you're left with the nice and pure stuff. This is an inverted catharsis because what the tyrant has to do is to get rid of anything that's good. Because if something is good or great or noble, it's a threat to the tyrant. So you have a kind of upside down kind of catharsis where you flush out everything that's good and you're left with, well, whatever's left in that setting. This is a rather disconcerting image, of course. Now, if we return then to the idea of the moral psychology here, I guess many of you have heard of this general tripartition of the soul in the Republic. So you have really three main faculties or parts of the soul. There is reason, and then there's timos, this sort of self-respect kind of thing, and then there's the appetites, food, drinking, and sex. And they all have their separate virtues. So that's just a structure, and a lot of good work has been done on this. But then there's the question, so what's the content? What is poured in here? What is the reality of this? And then there's a passage that explains to me how little it's been treated, relatively speaking, because it's a weird kind of passage. So this is Socrates talking about, Socrates as a character in the Dialogue of the Republic, talking about the desires that threaten to take over and that create the tyrant. So those desires that he's talking about, these are the ones that are awakened in sleep. When the rest of the soul, the rational, gentle, and ruling part, slumbers. Then the beastly and savage part, full of food and drink, casts off sleep and seeks to find a way to gratify itself. You know that there is nothing it won't dare to do at such a time. Free of all control, like shame or reason, it doesn't shrink from trying to have sex with a mother, as it's supposed to, or with anyone else at all. With a man, dog, or beast, it will commit any foul murder, and there is no food it refuses to eat. In a word, it omits no act of folly or shamelessness. So, fitting very broadly into this classification, it seems that most of the nastiness is coming from the desires. And the striking thing about this claim is this is not generally only about the tyrant, this is about everyone. It's made quite clear in the text that there might be exceptions, but generally this goes even for the best among us. This is what happens every night when we sleep, unless you do a lot of precautions and a lot of exercises. The default mode for all and every one of us, even the best of us, is that when you go to sleep, your reason relaxes, lets go of the grip. This monster comes up and wants to have sex with what it takes to be a mother. It wants to perhaps eat feces. It wants to do all kinds of transgressive things. So this isn't just a weird character as the tyrant. There is a very darkened anthropology present in Plato's Republic. And in a way, I think, it actually turns out that this image of the would seem originally to be of a tyrant, it's not limited to some weird and disconcerting passages in books 8 and 9. It's really what the whole project of the Republic is all about, in one way. Because if you look at the work as a whole, the very first book, it's 10 books in all. The very first book is kind of isolated. Some people think it used to work as a mini dialogue on its own. But from the beginning of book 2, there is one challenge that is raised. And that goes through the whole dialogue. The whole dialogue, basically, these 9 books are just Socrates' attempt to respond to a challenge from other mortals. The 2 very early and important thought experiments in the history of philosophy are presented in order to set up this challenge for Socrates and for the Republic and for all of us. The first is the one about 2 lives. So if you have one life where you really are just, you're really good inside, but everyone thinks that you're the opposite, that you're really a heel, a deeply unjust and evil person in every way. And then you have another life, the alternative life, where you really are that really bad and disgusting person, but everyone thinks that you're wonderful, and you get all the consequences of someone being wonderful, no matter what you do. Then the challenge is to argue for why we should choose to be good if we divorce actually being good from what we take to be its consequences. And the challenge and the idea is that really, if you think about it, we don't really like being just and good that much. We just like the consequences. We like that people think that we are good because it keeps us sort of going together with each other. So it's kind of like it's like an early form of a contract theory, basically, of why we act the way we do. It's not because we really love being good. It's because we realize that it's the only way to survive, basically. If we could get away with doing this, just one of us, we'd not do it. And the other thought experiment of Giger's ring, or Giger's ancestor's ring, is a way of dramatizing this. Now this is just a shepherd who finds a ring, and it turns out, he finds out by accident, that when he turns the signet part in, he becomes invisible. Think of this just as a superpower. It's whatever enables you to do whatever you like with impunity. No one's going to catch you for anything. You can do exactly what you want. And of course, in this story, what happens is that Gigas, he uses this force to, this superpower, to enter the castle, consort with the queen, and then make a deal with the queen to kill the king, and then become tyrant. So again, the whole setup for this whole dialogue is really about the idea of tyranny and the threat of the tyrant in each of us. That's sort of the basic idea here. So the idea of the tyrant is the thing that sort of makes the whole of the Republic at least 2 to 10. We have to make a special case for number 1 into one work. And that also means that Pericles, in a way, ironically, Pericles is this sort of weird society that's being built, constructed in the Republic, constructed in thoughts and words. Ironically, that kind of fairly totalitarian setup seems to be the only cure from avoiding the tyrant in each and every one of us. So that's the story in Plato. Now, often people set up Plato and Aristotle as if they're sort of working from separate corners, but that's not. Most of the time, on lots of stuff, they're generally in agreement. They're generally, so if you wonder, if you're reading one of them, and there's a few things you wonder what he thought about that, or what is the argument, look at the other guy, and there's a big chance that you will get closer to an answer. And so if you look at Aristotle's Tyrant, he too is someone who's, in a way, partly in Aristotle, defined by a sort of transgression. It's not as obvious in Aristotle as it is in Plato, but there is something about the tyrant, so that what's the crucial thing about him is that he undoes the order, the structure of law and constitution and habits that is there. He undoes all of that and sets up himself as a kind of replacement for that. So it's a particular kind of act that is dramatic for the person. In both Plato and Aristotle, there is a tendency to tie this very much to democracy. And of course, historians, those of you who are historians, ancient historians will know that there's a big debate, and most people who are historically informed will say that that's close to rubbish. It's not a historical truth that that's how it worked. There is a close link between democracy and some kinds of tyranny, like in the 500s and 400s, because then you have tyranny sort of leading into democracy. But that's here it works the other way around. It's democracy that's sort of the final stop before tyranny. But I think there are other reasons for this. It might have to do with the relevance to both of them. They're not actually eager Democrats, as you might know, on most reasons, Plato and Aristotle. So it might be about identifying a regime that is important, and that is sort of what they know from this town, from Athens. That's a very important thing there. And what happens then with the Aristotelian tyrant is that he loses three dimensions that are crucial for becoming or staying a fairly decent human being. First is law. Of course he loses law. I mean, by definition, he's the guy who undoes law. And when I keep saying he now, it's not sexist. They generally were male, and that's how they're designated by Plato and Aristotle too. So there is an undoing of law, of nomos, which is something that can keep you more or less on the straight and narrow. There is also an undoing of character because of this transgressive act. There is an instability about the character of the tyrant that doesn't really fit what Aristotle elsewhere seems to be saying about the stability of character and so on. So there is something very peculiar about this due to something that has to do with the gifts, the talents of the tyrant, but also something about the setup that he ends up in and how that transforms the tyrant himself. And finally, and this I would like to sort of point to as a particularly crucial sphere or dimension of the social being of everyone, including the tyrant, there is no friendship for the tyrant. Because friendship is about a kind of frankness. So when Aristotle says that good people don't allow their friends to act badly, it doesn't mean that they sort of use force against their friends. That's what bad people do. Fairly decent people in friendship, what they do is presumably that they talk about it. And that seems to be what you spend most of your days doing. If you're Aristotelian friends, the complete friendship is mainly just talk. It's about discussing what to do, how to go about it, what happened there, how to lead one's life. Most of it rather close to the ground, you know, what do we do tomorrow, what do we choose in this situation, but that seems to be what he's talking about. And by definition, if you're a tyrant, you don't have this. You've just said goodbye to all of that. There is nothing like friendship for you anymore. So any regime, and this is something I think is seriously under research still in Plato and Aristotle in particular, he's adamant that there is a close connection between the kind of regime and the kind of friendship that you can have. So they work somehow as sort of conditions of possibility for each other. And grudgingly, Aristotle even has to admit, you know, he has a lot of criticism of democracy, but he has to admit that, okay, when it comes to friendship, it seems democracy probably the best sort of condition for friendship. The worst one, without any competition at all, is tyranny. Both because, both when it comes to the relationships between people in the tyranny, but not least when it comes to the tyrant himself. Because of his way of being, because of his transgression and his way of doing everything by threats and deceit, and the one purpose always being to stay in power, it's not possible to talk in a friendly manner to a tyrant. That would just be inviting having your head chopped off. It's basically not possible. So the tyrant has cut himself off from friendship. There is no community at all. So Aristotle says concerning the political cure, that too is a disappointment. So we might think now, okay, so we've got this tyrant, we've got a situation closing in on tyranny, and so we might hope that there is a salvation in only focusing on the political sphere, the bios politicos, sort of in the abstract, if we don't have friendship or if friendship is under fire. But Aristotle is sort of of two minds about this. Of course, this is a setting where he's arguing for another kind of life. But still, just notice what he's saying here. The actions of the politician require trouble. Beyond the political activities themselves, these actions seek positions of power and honors, at least they seek happiness for the politician himself and for his fellow citizens, which is something different from political science itself, clearly visible on the assumption that it is. So, what's wrong with the political life then? Well, it seems that if you think of it on its own, and if you take Aristotle's sort of darkest words about it, I mean, I am building a case here. There are many other things going on in Aristotle concerning politics. The political life is a messy business, and it's not the kind of scholazo, the kind of place where you can reflect over things and find out the real good. The nitty-gritty of close to the ground politics involves living in a continuous sort of confusion between means and ends, turning means into ends and ends into means. So there's a lack of stability there, and a way of thinking that is very, very problematic, and probably not a sort of cure for all when it comes to securing the goodness of people. And that's why, I think that's one reason why Aristotle is so clear on the fact that we need friendship. There is no shortcut, there is no replacement for friendship. Now, finally, in Aristotle's case, he provides not only one set of advice for tyranny, how to provide this stability, but two sets of advice. And this is just absolutely baffling. So the first set is the traditional set. And that's the old-fashioned things like, in a way that very close to what we've seen dramatized in the Republic as well. So what you do then, if you want to hold on to the tyranny, in other words, for the tyrant, if you want to hold on to your life and power, the maximization of power, you get rid of decent people, you get rid of any kind of goodness and greatness, because that's always trouble for you. You outdoor gatherings, people must not be allowed to sort of get together and talk about stuff. That's never to your advantage. You make sure that there are that there's surveillance and spies and so on at all times. You do this partly by getting close to some groups, like in this world, slaves and women, who would be the sort of the underdogs in the outpost. If you can get a straight link to them, then you made a sort of topsy-turvy operation on each household, and you get information about what's going on in each household, and no one feels safe, no one feels trust any longer, and that means that they're not going to enter into any kind of systematic force against you either. And it's the stuff that we saw from the Republic. Keep them poor because they worry about the close things and not the big issues of how to live or what kind of city were we supposed to have. And you keep, I guess rumors isn't quite the word, perhaps it's more like slander. You make sure that there's slander and insecurity about what's the truth and what's really going on, and what did he do and who did that and so on. This is the whole 9 yards of the old list. And of course, make sure that we keep at it with war. War will keep people poor, it will keep them convinced that they need you, and there's even the bonus that if you have a particularly troublesome person, you can just send him off on some kind of suicide mission and you're probably rid of him. So it's sort of a very sort of a triple win situation for the tyrant. The striking thing now is that Aristotle doesn't stop there. He provides a second set of advice, an alternative set of advice, which is a lot of it. I wouldn't even put up here the stuff that has to do with seeming. So you need to seem to use public means well. You need to appear dignified. You need to avoid seeming arrogant. And that doesn't mean just to look on your face. It includes stuff like avoid raping boys and girls, basically. That kind of, it's on that level. And to seem eager concerning the gods. So this is a bit baffling and perhaps disconcerting, because this is actually pretty good advice, right? If you want to keep your tyranny stable, and you can get some kind of sympathy as a great guy from the populace, then that is going to provide stability. I think it's quite excellent advice. So we have the question then, why in the world would Aristotle want to help out the tyrant? So of course, one option is, and I'm going to list 2 or 3 or 4 options now, starting with the ones that I think are the poorest, is that Aristotle has some sort of tyrannical leanings. Of course, he married the niece of the tyrant, and he was a teacher for the son of or the potentate, for those of us who still believe in those stories. But I think that's sort of a cheap way out. We should try to find something that has to do with the text and philosophy, not just rush out to ideas about if possible. It couldn't just be about completeness. If you do a proper investigation into something, you should be complete. So it just happens to be true, so I'm just going to say it. I say it as I see it. That's closer to something that seems sensible about Aristotle, but it's not that good. It could also be that he's not really talking to the tyrant. He's not providing the tyrant with advice. He's really providing everybody else with advice about how to spot a tyrant. So it's very useful to know then that you don't only have this kind of tyrant who does away with people and just acts like a brute. You also have the kind of tyrant that has a smile on his face and seems like a very decent chap. So that there is that. I think we're closing in, but it's not the whole question. Then there's another thing that I think does provide part of an answer, and that is that tyranny may not be the worst thing. To Aristotle, as to Plato, there is something that's worse than tyranny most of the time, and that is civil war. Stasis in that form. It seems that they are quite agreed, and I think on this Aristotle is actually clearer than Plato, that if you have civil war, then everything's ruined, because everyone ends up doing or suffering horrible things, and to the way that the city might look like a ruin after a civil war is nothing to what the souls of people in the city look like after a civil war. Everything is ruined, so it will take at least a generation to fix things. So this, I think, is closer to the truth. But I think just as a final sort of suggestion, I think it's also useful here to think of this in terms of communication, because as I said, the tyrant has no recourse to friendship. You cannot just speak frankly to the tyrant. You have to think strategically the way that the tyrant does in order to communicate with the tyrant. Now this might be a case of that, because by providing good advice of the alternative kind, you are actually also providing, first of all, the city with some amelioration. If you have a tyrant who's starting out like an old school tyrant, and he gets this advice, then chances are the town is going to actually be a slightly better, somewhat better place to live in, because he's now doing all the working rather hard to seem nice, to seem right. And Aristotle does concretize this quite a bit. It's not just seeming to spend the money right by sort of claiming to have done so. Aristotle actually spells out that he needs to sort of show the books, show what the money was spent for, and show that he's sort of a servant of the people rather than a tyrant. So there is that, but I think there is even the potential for one further good thing coming out of this kind of advice from Aristotle's part, given Aristotle's own theory about how we become what we are. So to Aristotle, we become good by doing good things. So you become just by doing just actions. You become courageous by doing courageous actions. So this is a strategic and deceitful way of luring the tyrant, in spite of his own desires, to turn himself into someone who's slightly better. Because the tyrant will, by doing things that are slightly better, in spite of himself, he will become slightly better, according to Aristotle's theory of how we become better. This is not to say that he's going to become good, and there's also the basic question of how could this happen, because the standard image of character in Aristotle is that in your late teens, things are pretty much settled for you. Whether you've got this kind of character or that kind of character, the roughest work is done, and you can really just do pruning and tinkering after that. But remember that there's something unique about the character of the tyrant. He has a very unsettled kind of character, and that might actually be something that works to one's advantage in this setting. So it might be that there is a chance that the tyrant becomes slightly better if he follows this excellent advice from Aristotle. So to tie this down slightly, all this speculation to what Aristotle himself says, he ends this part of his analysis by saying, and his rule will last longer, and that of course is the thing that the tyrant himself will understand, because that's all that's in it for the tyrant. And his character, his ethos, will either be nobly disposed to virtue or else half good. Hemi-testos. Not vicious, but half vicious. Maybe honest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for this wonderful lecture. And thank you all for attending. We were happy to have you here, and then we can continue at the Norwegian Institute. For those that would like to join us for a glass of wine, the courageous ones, we hope to see you all there. Thank you.